Hi readers, welcome back to Reading Realm once again. I am excited to be back with another review. This is one that I've had on my in progress list, I think since like the very first update I did this year. This one I've been in the middle of for a really long time because I started it and then I read a bunch of other things. But I did finally finish it. This is The Wanderer by Sharon Creech. This is a Newbery Honor book as well. And this is one of the ones that's kind of more of a young reader, not really children's book, but like middle school aged or like late elementary school aged book. But I really liked it. I have had this book for a really, really long time and never read it. I don't actually know when I got it or how long I've had it, but I know I've had it for probably at least like 6 or 7 years. I think my mom found it at a garage sale or something and thought I would like it. But it's a really interesting book because it is about, it's told from two perspectives, and it's kind of cool. One of the things that I noticed that I like, that I feel like more split perspective books should do this, because this is actually so helpful, and I think it's done this way for younger readers to keep track of it more, but I feel like adult or like young adult, like new adult fiction that has split perspectives should do this too, because this is really cool, because since it is told in two perspectives, the two perspectives are in a different font so that you can tell them apart in the middle of the chapter. It also does say the person up here as well, but there's, this person has a lot. Here's the other one. You have two different fonts so that you can tell who is writing at that point, because this is about a family. It's 3 brothers who are adults, and their kids who are cousins, except one of them is the cousin of, I believe, another sibling that they have. So everyone on the boat to her is either a cousin or an uncle, and she's the only girl on the boat. She's 13, and she really wanted to be allowed on the boat and get to go sailing across the ocean to Europe. And she's 13, and her other cousin that, both people who are telling the story, which is her and one of her cousins, they're both 13. I think that it's really interesting because it's written as if you're reading both of their ship logs. So it's like, today we did this, we saw a dolphin, this happened, and stuff like that. But through that, you also see more of their sort of thoughts and feelings about stuff. And what's also really interesting is the protagonist, the female protagonist, I guess, since there's sort of two, is adopted into this family. And it's interesting. So they're going to Europe to visit their grandfather, who is the uncle's father. The 3 uncles' fathers, I guess, since there's 3 of them. But it's interesting because this girl who's never met this person, but who's been adopted into this family, tells stories about the grandfather's life that she actually knows, and everyone's like, how do you know this? And you find that out at the end. But the other thing that's interesting is that the boy, Cody, and their other cousin, they don't know what happened to Sophie's birth parents because they know she's adopted, but they don't know what happened. And it's really interesting because by the end you kind of do figure out, but the way you figure out is really interesting because it's not like she directly tells anyone. She just says some things or does some things that allows other people to figure it out, and then one of the uncles also kind of gives a little bit of confirmation on that. But it's really, really interesting, and I think it's really cool to see it kind of in the two perspectives because each of them is dealing with something where Sophie is dealing with, like, she's the only girl on this boat full of either men or boys, if they're her cousins or her uncles. And they're all like, oh, you're a girl, are you sure you want to do whatever? And she's really determined to be like, I can do knots, I can do the sails, I can do all this stuff. And it's also really interesting because Cody is kind of the fool a little bit. Like, people sort of think he's less intelligent than he is, and so he's dealing with that, and she's dealing with sort of the judgments against her being the female one. But it's really, really interesting, and I think it's also just really fun because the way that it's written as logs, you get just like these little alternating snippets of their days. So you see like Cody's perspective on something and then Sophie's perspective on the same thing. And it's really, really interesting. And then you also get little snippets into the uncles' lives as well. And at the end, also a little bit for the grandfather, who they do eventually meet. But it's really, really interesting too because as you learn more about Sophie's past and her biological family, you also kind of learn why this particular thing is almost like a sort of therapeutic thing for her. Like, it's not really said that way from her perspective, but it is very, very interesting once you know the things that you eventually find out. And I think it's kind of fun to have a book like this where you have these two perspectives that are both dealing with something that I feel like is kind of a common thing at that age. Like, oh, that's a boy thing. Are you sure you want to go like on a boat and do all the knots and sails and fishing and whatever, versus like being underestimated and people thinking you're dumb just because you kind of joke around more. Or there's a part where Cody keeps referring to things as thingies, and the other guy's like, your son's an idiot, and then the other is like, don't call my son that. And then it turns out he does know the names for the things that he's been calling thingies, but he just prefers to call them thingies. And that's something that I do often. Like, either because my ADHD makes me suddenly forget an entire word, or because sometimes I just know that the person I'm talking to, if I say like, oh, that thingy that we were talking about, they know what I mean, or they can figure it out. So I thought that was kind of fun. I also, there's little bits of art on the different chapters, which I think is also kind of fun because it's very subtle, just little drawings, but I always like that because it's just kind of an extra fun detail. And I also think it's really interesting, so there's a third cousin, Brian, and I don't know if this was the intention. I don't know if this was in any way planned. I don't know if the author even realizes. This book was published in 2000, so I don't know if these specific traits were as commonly known back then. I was born in 2000, so I don't know. But Brian, at certain moments in this book, comes across to me as slightly autism coded. And I don't know if that is in any way intended. There's nothing about different neurotypes in this book. There's nothing about any kind of, like, thing about him that would make it seem confirmed that that is an actual intended choice that the author made. But there are just a few moments where it's like, okay, he's obsessed with lists. He writes lots of lists. The other people mock him for it. People in my family, some of them, mock me for making lists all the time, and that is an autistic thing that I do. And then there were other times where it was mentioned, like, he just, like, doesn't get certain social situations or things like that. I'm like, there's just, like, a couple little details here and there where it's like, is he supposed to be autism coded? Because that's really interesting. There's never any confirmation of that, and he's not really the protagonist anyway, so you're seeing everything about him from his cousins' perspectives. So maybe they're just like, he's weird and antisocial, because to them that's how they see him or something. But I definitely found that really interesting, just because as I've been educating myself more on autism and all that stuff for my own self, I've started noticing things in characters where it's like, that's actually a pretty common autistic trait. So stuff like that, just picking up on that was kind of interesting. I really don't think that was the intention. Just based on the way it was written, there were certain moments where I was like, if he is, and she mentions that he is, I do feel like maybe that's almost like enforcing incorrect stigma, just because some of the things that were referred to him about are kind of like stereotypes, but then it's never confirmed, so I don't know if that was intentional. I definitely don't know. I was 0 years old in 2000. I was born at the very, very end of 2000, so my birthday's actually in a couple weeks. But I don't know what the attitude around autism was at that time, because obviously I was 0. I wasn't diagnosed until I was 14. Like, I didn't even really start learning that much about autism until I was, like, 18, 19, 20, and up. So, I definitely think that it's interesting, because especially the things like making lists and stuff, I don't know if that was commonly talked about back then. I feel like a lot of the older autistic stereotypes are more on, like, the social side, or, like, obsessed with trains and good at math, which is not necessarily true. Especially the math thing. Math is my worst subject. I don't like math. But then there's the stereotype. Every autistic person is a math genius. That's not true. But I definitely think that it's kind of interesting how it's written. But also, I definitely... There's a cool seahorse. But I definitely think that it's kind of fun, too, because this book kind of deals with several different challenges that these characters have, apart from the, like, Sophie is female and Cody is not perceived to be as smart as he is, and also Sophie's adopted and stuff like that. It also has to do with both the actual, like, physical challenges of, like, we're on a boat in a storm and our sails are tearing and the ropes are coming undone and we have to, like, fight to keep the boat together kind of challenges. But also, the situations that arise when 6 people are trapped on a very small boat together for quite a while, like several days or weeks. Because it's kind of cool how it's dealing with, like, interpersonal issues plus also just environmental factors of storms and all that stuff. So I definitely really, really enjoyed it. I think of the books I've read this year, it's probably not in my top 5 just because I think it is targeted a little younger and it's also more of a realism book, and a lot of times I like more of the fantasy, high fantasy, sci-fi, recently also more like mystery thriller, murder mystery type things this year. I've been reading A Good Girl's Guide to Murder, Natasha Preston, all that stuff. So this genre of, like, fiction but, like, real world could totally happen, could be an actual person's journal type thing, isn't necessarily what I always seek out for myself. Every now and then I run into one that is good, and I think that this is one of them where it is good, but just if I compare it to some of the other things I've read this year, which is probably unfair to do, it's fine. It's good. If you like this genre, I think you would really like it, or if you're in this age range, I think you would really like it. For me personally, there were a lot of other books this year that I was much more excited to be reading, which I think is why it took me almost the whole year to actually, like, pick it up and finish it. But I did. And I will also say, I definitely do like sort of the way the adopted person is depicted, because that whole aspect of it, like, her uncles are trying to tell the cousins, like, be careful, like, don't pry too much into her past, like, be respectful of her past and everything, but the cousins are also like, well, we want to know. And I think that it's written in a really, like, accurate way to that. My family participated in the foster care system, and my sister is adopted, so I think it kind of, like, resonated with me a little bit that, like, when we would bring in a foster child, my cousins would have questions about, like, that person, and it's, I think they dealt with that in a pretty good way, especially for, like, a younger reader who may be adopted or know people who are adopted, because I feel like often, especially among younger people, there's kind of a stigma around that. I think older people, I haven't really heard it as much among, like, older people, but I think especially if you're in, like, elementary school, middle school, and someone finds out you're adopted, there's, like, the reaction of, like, oh, so your parents didn't want you kind of thing. And I think in this, they do a good job of, like, her parents are the people that adopted her, and she had parents before, but that doesn't mean that her adoptive parents aren't her parents, and stuff like that. And I think, obviously, every person who deals with adoption or knows someone who's adopted has a different experience. And for me, I'm not adopted, but my sister is, so I don't have firsthand experience with it. I've just witnessed it from the sibling side of being a sibling to an adopted person. But I do think that from what I have heard and seen from other people who are adopted, I feel like they would kind of approve of how it was dealt with in this, because it was kind of acknowledging that there can be stigma and confusion and questions around it, but also, like, the adults were like, nah, she's part of the family, like, whatever happened before, that doesn't mean that she's less part of the family and stuff like that. So I thought that I should draw attention to that, because I think that that is an important consideration when you're dealing with a character like that. Also, there's a giant squid. Just kind of messing with the book as I'm going through it. But yeah, I definitely think that it's a good book if you like this type of book, or if you are in this age range. I also feel like potentially because of the way that chapters are pretty short, and I think, again, this has to do with the age range it's intended for, this feels like a book that a teacher would read to their class, to me, a little bit. I remember in, like, 4th, 5th, and not as much 6th, but 4th and 5th grade, we would have specific times when our teacher would read to us. And in 4th grade, I was at a Spanish immersion school, so we were read to in English during our English class, specifically. And 4th grade, for a lot of schools in California, is Gold Rush year. And so I remember the teacher reading us a book, I think it was called By the Great Horn Spoon, and it's about the gold rush, and the character kept using the phrase, "we'll make out all right," or "I'll make out all right," and everyone in the class lost it, because at that age, making out meant kissing, which was obviously super embarrassing and humiliating, because we were 4th graders. So every time the phrase, "I'll make out all right," happened, the class just, like, fell on the floor. It was great. And then, yeah, 5th grade, we were read to more as, like, this is your time to, like, color on your weekly assignment. That's, like, the art assignment, while I read you a book. And she read us, the Found series by Margaret Peterson Haddix, except at that point I don't think all of them had been out, so she read us, I think, the first 2. That's a good series. I realize I'm now promoting other books than this one that I'm talking about right now, but that definitely does feel like this would be a book that a teacher would read to a class, maybe, like, 3rd through 6th graders, potentially. A teacher would read this. And actually, at the end of the book, it does have literature circle questions, and then also activities. So you can create a map of the Wanderer's journey in addition to labeling the places the ship sails, list some of the important events that happen in each place, or keep a diary of a time in your life when you were faced with a conflict, emphasize how you coped with the experience and learned from it. And then there are also the literature circle questions, some of which I feel like they have spoilers in them. But, like, one of them is describe some of the challenges on board the ship, such as cooking, eating, sleeping, and keeping watch. How do the sea and weather affect these simple tasks? Or, do you think The Wanderer is a good title for this novel? Why or why not? That question is just kind of funny to me. And I think it's a good title, because, number one, The Wanderer is the name of the ship that they're on, so it's named after the boat, but also they are the wanderers, because they're traveling and doing this whole journey and voyage. So anyway, yeah, I mean, I think it's definitely kind of a light-hearted book sometimes, but it does also have some more serious moments, especially, like, with the storm and the interpersonal issues, and then one of the uncles is having some issues with their job. One of the uncles is kind of in a unrequited love situation. But it's kind of fun to be able to sort of see how the journey kind of brings them closer together, even though it is challenging at times. And then at the end, it's definitely interesting because they finally meet the person that they've been traveling across the whole ocean to go see. But yeah, I liked it. I think it's definitely a good book. And I think definitely if you like this genre or are a younger reader, or if you teach a younger age range that might like this, it's a good book. And especially, I think people who are interested in nautical exploration or sailing or anything like that, it's kind of fun. I have not personally sailed, but I do spend a lot of time around boats in the summer. We have a motorboat that we take somewhere. We've been on ferries. I've done like paddleboarding and rafting. Not rafting, but like the little inflatable rowboats, whatever those things are called. But and normal like aluminum rowboats and stuff. But yeah, I mean it's definitely really fun. I've never like crossed a whole ocean in those, but I do know a little bit about boats and sailing, and my dad grew up sailing a lot, so I feel like my dad would like this book. But yeah, like I think it's definitely a fun book, and I think the adventure part of it is fun, the perspective switch and the sort of like ship log style of telling is kind of cool. But yeah, let me know if you've read this book or any books like it, or what you're reading. Hopefully it's something good. Also, let me know what you might want to read next year, because that's coming up pretty soon, in a couple weeks. It's wild. This year has felt like it's gone by so fast. But if you haven't yet, please subscribe, and I will hopefully see you next time, and keep reading. Bye!